from originally?
Seattle.
All right, so right in the tech center already before it was even...
Before it was a tech center.
Exactly. So growing up, did you have any interest in photography or cuisine?
Well, both. When I was 9 years old, I decided I would cook Thanksgiving dinner all by myself. And I went to the library and got all these books. And around that age, maybe a little even earlier, I was given a camera. And I thought it was the coolest possible thing. And so I was super serious kid photographer up through high school and college.
Mm-hmm. So when did the interest in like the much more advanced technology come in? Because those two things, while they are technical, you know, food has the chemistry part, there's a lot of science behind photography. When did the real hard science bug hit you, and when did you want to start pursuing that?
Well, when I was a kid, I was also really good at school. And so I loved science, and I wound up pursuing science. I ultimately got a PhD in physics. Mm-hmm. And during that time I was intensely doing that. I wasn't taking as many photos or cooking that much. Some, but not that much.
Right.
Then I wound up working for Stephen Hawking, doing research on the fundamental nature of space and time. I took a leave of absence from the job working with Stephen to work on a software project with some friends from graduate school, and that turned into a company. And 2 years later, I sold that company to Microsoft, and I became Microsoft's first chief technology officer.
What on earth was that job like?
Well, in the late 80s up through 2000, it was amazing. It was a point in time when the world of computing was expanding enormously. We had a motto at Microsoft, a computer on every desk and in every home. And people initially would laugh at us, like, what do you mean? I'll never have a computer. And of course, those same people are texting and tweeting and doing all kinds of things. So going from computers being an exotic thing to computers being a tool for every man, that's what we were engaged in doing. So it was very exciting.
And it sounds like really fulfilling work too. So when did you know that it was time to step away from that role and start pursuing other projects?
Well, I'd always been interested in tons of different things. And life is funny. It rewards you by giving you more responsibility. The only institution in life that gives you time off for good behavior is prison. Everything else, good behavior means you get more responsibility and a bigger job, and you're working harder. So I decided at one point that, hey, as great as Microsoft was, I should spend some time on everything else. So that was in 1999 that I stepped away from Microsoft and started doing some more serious cooking. At one point, I had gone on a leave of absence from Microsoft to go to chef school in France. So I was kind of into it at an extreme level. But I took it to another notch and started working on a book that became Modernist Cuisine, which is a 2,400-page book on all of the modern techniques of cooking. And in planning that book, I had this dilemma. How do you get people interested in a gigantic book that's in many ways very technical? It's explaining cooking techniques that are right at the cutting edge, which can be intimidating and off-putting. I thought, well, let's try to take incredible photos of food, photos that really suck people in, and also show how cooking works. So we got this idea of cutting things in half, so that cutting a whole stove in half, or a pot in half, or a pressure cooker, so you could see what was happening inside. Well, that worked out, and
I'd say so.
we sold a way more copies of that book than I think we ever estimated. We've sold more than 250,000 copies of that and my related books so far, which is something for a 2,400-page book.
Seriously. No
but then we had a lot of people calling up asking, hey, where can I buy those photos? We thought, I don't know.
Hadn't thought about it.
Yeah, exactly. So that has led in the last couple of years to me opening 4 galleries.
Wow.
They are the only galleries in the world focusing on food photography by a single artist.
Wow. Excuse me just for 1 second. I got like 3 text messages from, okay, there we go. Sorry. Because when you're a reporter and your phone starts blowing.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a switch there. I just want to backtrack for just a second. This is just such a crazy thing that you spent so much time at this like really high pressure company, and even though it was productive, now you have an opportunity to pursue a career path that has your 2 childhood interests. I mean, was there like a moment where you went like, golly gee, I cannot believe that this is real, or is it still not really hitting home yet?
Oh, almost every day I wonder whether this is all real.
Yeah.
It's true that I get to indulge 2 things that I've been interested in my whole life.
Yeah.
Now, I still work in science, and I've got a company that I am the CEO of, and so I still even have the day job part. I do research on dinosaurs and dig dinosaurs up. I also do research in astronomy, and I've written a bunch of papers on asteroids. So I get to do this whole selection of different stuff.
That's pretty amazing. How do you find the ability in your brain to like switch off, like to switch gears? All of a sudden you have to be in photographer mode, or all of a sudden you have to be in paleontologist mode, or you have to be in astronomer mode. Is there that kind of switch where you have to change gears, or is it all kind of related to you?
Well, one of the things that's great about any activity that you do is, does it really fully engage you? And all of these have the property of fully engaging you.
Right.
I mean, you can cook while distracted, but you do a much better job of cooking if you're really focused on it. If you're taking pictures, it really helps if you're focused on it, literally in the focus sense, but also each of these activities requires a tremendous amount of attention. And that is the great thing about it, is once you're in one of them, you're in that thing.
Right.
And you can't think very much about the other issues of life, whether they're what am I going to have for lunch, or these other pursuits that I have, because you're there in the moment.
Cool. So now that, I mean, the photography has taken off so much, I mean, that's pretty amazing that people look at a cookbook and say how they want to buy the photos, and you talked about some of the techniques of bifurcating everything, and you can see the cross section. But talk to me about the technique of actually creating these photos, and how did you get these shots to work?
Well, the challenge in taking pictures of food is we all see it, like 2 or 3 times a day. Otherwise, you get really hungry. Yeah. So I wanted to show the unfamiliar aspect of very familiar topics. And how do you do that? Plus, we are inundated with food photography, primarily in advertising historically, and then more recently in Instagram. So we are surrounded by food photos all the time. How can you make it unique and original? And sometimes that's just you found the perfect tomato, and you photograph that tomato in a way that makes you look at it and I'm not being very articulate because it's fundamentally an artistic thing. Do you really get that with the tomato? But we also like using techniques that help you see things it'd be impossible to see. So I do a lot of high-speed photography, where things happen in an instant. I've got some shots of spilling wine, and we've all spilled wine. And apart from the oops, you don't get to look at it and experience actually how beautiful it is. It looks almost like a glass as the wine is flying through the air. We look at things at a microscopic scale. Of course, our eyes normally only see a certain thing, but with microscopes and specialized optics, I can look super up close. And as you look super up close, you see aspects of food you never would have guessed. Besides going too fast, there's also things that happen too slow to see. So I've got a series of pictures they're taken in vineyards of star trails. Well, because the Earth rotates, if you watch stars, they make these circles, but you can't perceive that as a person standing there. Even if you intellectually know that the Earth's rotating, you don't perceive the star trail.
Right.
But with very long exposures, like 4 hours of exposure, you can.
Right. So am I have this correct that robots somehow assisted in these?
Yeah. So when you make something like you're splashing wine or you're dropping berries into water or into cream, it all happens very, very fast. And you can just take a lot of pictures and hope to get lucky, and that works to an extent, and I've done that. But if you can use robots to control the action, you can make it more repeatable. And the goal of making it repeatable is it gives the photographer more control over the composition. So it's not just a happy accident, although all photographers have those, me too, and I love them. It really allows you to approach it from a much more rigorous perspective. So we build all kinds of robots to spill wine. Believe it or not,
I was going to say, I ever thought you'd say that sentence?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. There's a French technique for opening a bottle of champagne called sabering, where the sommelier will take a sword, literally, and whack the end of the champagne bottle off. Well, I wanted to get a photo of that, and so we built a robot called SaberBot
Right. Wow.
that does exactly that. And by being able to do it on command,
Right.
we have more control over the photo.
Exactly, and there's no human element of someone trying to cut a sword and the angle being off.
Yes, exactly.
So I do want to be cognizant of your time here. So you're giving a guest lecture at RIT today.
Yes.
So I know I asked you this already. This is your first time in Rochester?
No, when I worked at Microsoft, I came here a number of times to meet with Kodak. So I've come here before, but I was always very business focused, and I never actually got a chance to see the Eastman Museum. I'm going to see that today because I love cameras and technology, and of course Rochester played such a seminal role in the development of photography, and that continues on in RIT having one of the best photography departments in the country.
Right, and us becoming an increasing center for optics as well. So
yes.
As someone interested in astronomy and photography, I'm sure that you're licking your chops over that. What are you actually presenting about at RIT? What's the general structure for someone who can't attend? What are you talking about there?
Well, many of the issues we touched on here, but in particular how technology is enabling new kinds of photography. For the kinds of photos I take, or make might be a better thing, whether it's robotic technology in the setup, or I've been designing my own cameras because there's things I want the cameras to do that conventional cameras don't do, or building my own microscopes, or and then there's specialized software that we use either to coordinate the taking of pictures or to assemble pictures. For example, problem every photographer has is depth of field. That's how much of the photo is in focus. Now, sometimes it's cool to have only part of the photo in focus and the rest blurry. But if you wanted it all to be in focus, what could you do? And it turns out there's a technique called focus stacking that lets you do that. And it's particularly useful for macro or micro things where the normal depth of field that the optics give you is just too small to give you a sense of what's going on. So by using these techniques with software, you can extend that. And I view it as being no different than the technology of film that improved photography or the technology of optics that improved photography. Each of these, photography is maybe the most technologically enabled art. You know, without the invention of the photographic process, there'd be no photography and no photographic art. And I think that's one of the interesting things about photography is that it's both highly technical and in the hands of the right person is also an art. But that process didn't stop, you know, with George Eastman and film. That process has continued on to the digital world, and you know, so far as we can project, new technology is going to continue to enable photography.